Have you ever thought about leaving the country due to your student loan debt? If so, I will go over some things that will be pretty shocking that might make you feel really good about that decision. But also, I want you to know that you don't have to do that. I'm going to show you some tips as to why you don't need to leave the country if you feel like you need to, if only reason is your student loan debt. And I'm going to show you just some shocking things in this video I don't think that you've thought about if you've ever kind of fantasized about living abroad and just getting away from all the financial stress that student loans brings. So let's go into some really shocking tips that will help you decide whether or not leaving the country because of your student loan debt is a good decision or not. So worst case, federal student loans are a percent of your income. That means it's always a percent. Now that percent depends on who's in office and what plans come out, right? But 10% of your income is generally a typical number that we see, right? Even though sometimes it's more or less than that. Now, when you think about what is a percent of income, what does that mean, right? People live in California even though they pay 10% of their income to state income tax, and they choose to live in California instead of living in Nevada that has no income tax because they prefer to live in California because the weather's gorgeous, right? So that's an example of why federal student loans should not stress you out if they are able to be a percent of your income. It's not fun to pay a percent of your income, but it is by definition affordable. If something happens where you lose your job or you have a change in income, you can get your payment recalculated to be something that is more manageable. Now, with private student loans, think about this. If you have private student loans or you're thinking about leaving the country, one fear people have is, well, what if I want to come back and visit family? What if I want to come back and visit friends? Will they arrest me at the airport? Those are things that do not happen. So with private student loans, there's only money to go after if you have assets or income or a cosigner that has assets or income on your private student loans. If you stop paying on your loans, then they can try to get a judgment against you in a civil, case, right? A civil court. And that judgment might just be, hey, you got to pay. Well, for you to, pay, there has to be money there to pay. And so if you just do not listen to the judgment or pay what you're supposed to pay, you're in default. Your credit score gets wrecked, right? You might not be able to get a loan for a car or a house. Now, if you're living abroad, maybe that's not a problem. Maybe that's not something that needs to stress you out. I've certainly had a lot of people move from Canada to the U.S. that have Canadian private student loans that just decided to stop paying, and vice versa. So, I think that, what's kind of interesting about private student loans is it feels insurmountable, but, frankly, like, what's the worst that can happen? You have to define what that is. And once you've defined the worst that can happen, which is they could try to garnish, some sort of asset or get a judgment against you, then if you don't have that much in the way of that, then maybe it's not something worth worrying about. Now, the most powerful tool of all for leaving the country and not having financial ramifications for it is something called the foreign earned income exclusion. So the FEIE is really important, and I'm going to show real quick how this can help you and just what it is exactly. So the FEIE is the foreign earned income exclusion. So basically the way it works is if you're a U.S. citizen who's living in a foreign country, and then you have to be out of the U.S. for 330 full days at least. Now, what you can do is look at how much income you made in that foreign country, and you do not have to pay U.S. tax or report on that income up to a certain amount. So that's what the exclusion means. It's income you're earning abroad and that you're excluding from your U.S. taxable income. So what you can do is if you take your tax return and you make sure you have to file a tax return every year, you do have to file this, right? Now, when you file this return, what it'll tell you is that your U.S. taxable income, if it's below whatever the FEIE exclusion is, your U.S. taxable income is zero. So if your income is zero in the U.S., 10% of zero on an income-driven repayment plan is also zero. So what a lot of people don't even realize is that you can make $100,000 a year, let's say living in Australia every year, have the FEIE calculated, file your tax returns in the U.S. every year, and your taxable income would be zero. And 10% of zero is zero. You could pay 0% of your income for 20 years or 25 years, depending on what type of repayment plan you're on. And at the end of that period, your loan is forgiven. Now, if you have any U.S.-based assets, then there's a chance you might have to pay some taxes in the forgiven amount. But that depends on if there's law that excludes forgiven debt from taxable income at that point when you're forgiven, which probably there will be. So effectively, this is why moving abroad is actually, in some cases, financially a decent decision if you have student loans, Because if you have federal student loans and you move abroad and you're a permanent resident abroad, your taxable income in the US that you're filing every year is probably zero, and so your IDR payments are probably zero. So in other words, this fantasy of moving abroad and not having to worry about your student loans is actually real, except you don't even need to default on federal loans because of income-driven repayment. You can be not in default and pay 0% of your income and not have to worry about anything. If you have no private student loans, let's say you might have a little bit that you borrowed from undergrad, you pay those off. Now you have nothing to worry about because all of your federal student loans can be through the FEIE paying $0 a month. You just have to work with your servicer to make sure that you submit tax returns every year for proof of income and not something else. And then you don't have to worry anymore. Then you can live abroad. But that's not the only option, so I'm going to show you a couple more choices. So we mentioned the need to file that U.S. tax return every year. That's how you would take advantage of what at the FEIE in terms of getting your payment really low on your student loans. But it's really important to call out that leaving the country is absolutely not your only option. So you can do other things with your student loans. If you think about worst case, your federal student loans are 1% of your income, right? One thing that's pretty much true no matter what profession that you're in is you will probably earn a lot more money working in the United States than out of the United States. Not in every case, but usually professionals make a higher amount of money in the first place as U.S. residents than you would make somewhere else. So for example, physicians make a lot more money in the United States than they do elsewhere. Veterinarians tend to make more here than they would elsewhere. Dentists tend to make more here than they would elsewhere. Even, bachelor's degree holding college graduates tend to make a lot more here than they would elsewhere. Now, there might be more benefits elsewhere. There might be a stronger social safety net elsewhere. And if you happen to be a permanent resident or citizen of another country that has a better social safety net, maybe you don't need to worry about the difference in income. But from a financial perspective, what's interesting is, generally speaking, even if you take your higher income you make in the U.S. and take away 10% of that for your student loans on an income-driven repayment, your net income after dealing with that student loan hit is often better than if you had zero payment working abroad. So what that tells you, you've got choices, you've got options, right? You don't have to be stuck. You don't have to live in fear with these student loans. If you want to move abroad because you have a significant other that's a foreign citizen, or you have family abroad, or you just want to, then great. Let's make that student loans not part of your burden, not part of your stress, by using this strategy with the FEIE and paying $0 a month. And if you would rather stay in the U.S. or if you'd like to come back, then you need to just get up where you left off if you've been abroad for a while, or you might not need to leave in the first place. So there's always hope with student loans. If you have any questions or concerns about this strategy for moving abroad with student loan debt, put them in the comments, and thank you for watching Student Loan Planner.